Hi everyone. I have a lot of things that I've been wanting to share, but I've just been really busy because of the holidays and other things, and I haven't had a chance to make a video, but I eventually want to get back to explaining this part of this Google Doodle over here and why I believe this represents the consummation of the covenant and why I believe it's represented by the Mount of Olives. That's something that I want to get into, but that will probably take some time, and so if we're still here, I'll try to do that after Christmas. But for now, I wanted to go over some tables that I just pulled up recently, and this is one that I did on the United Nations. I put United Nations, War, Nuke, Noel, and Yuletide, and it's really interesting where this comes up, because it comes up in Jeremiah 27 verse 7. So you have 27, which I believe represents the year 2017, and then you also have 77, which I believe represents the year Hebrew year 5777. And it's really interesting how this matrix reads, and I'll do that in a second, but I'll just point out the terms first. You have nations over here, you have war over here in the purple, then you have Yule over here in the green. You have the word united coming up in ULS form here in the orange color with the letters U, N, I, T, E, D. You have Noel in the blue, and you have the word nuke over here in the blue, the bluish purple. And like I said, it's coming up in Jeremiah 27:7, and I'm going to go ahead and read the matrix. It says, "And all the nations shall serve him and his son's son until the time of his own land come, and then many nations and great kings shall make him their bondmen. And it shall come to pass that the nation and the kingdom which will not serve the same Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, that will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation will I punish, saith Jehovah, with the sword and with famine and with the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand. But as for you, hearken ye not to your prophets, nor to your diviners, nor to your dreams, nor to your soothsayers, nor to your sorcerers, that speak unto you, saying, Ye shall not serve the king of Babylon." And it's interesting that it has the word Yesha right here, which is short for Yeshua. I've pointed that out in other tables, because as I continue to read this matrix, you'll see how it's a little ambiguous, because God is telling them to serve the king of Babylon and to come under the yoke of the king of Babylon. And of course, we know that the king of Babylon represents the Antichrist, but in this instance, God is telling the people to serve the king of Babylon. But I'll go ahead and continue reading, and then I'll explain that a little more later. So it goes on to say, "For they prophesy lie unto you, to remove you far from your land, and that I should drive you out, and you should perish. But the nation that shall bring their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, and serve him, that nation will I let remain in their own land, saith Jehovah, and they shall till it and dwell therein. And I spake to Zedekiah, king of Judah, according to all these words, saying, Bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon, and serve him and his people, and live. Why will ye die, thou and thy people, by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence, as Jehovah has spoken concerning the nation that will not serve the king of Babylon." And I've explained before how I believe the yoke represents DNA, represents 2 DNA strands, and it's also the part of the scales that the 2 weights hang off of it. It's a yoke in the middle, and so it also represents the scales, which I believe is what's represented by Zechariah 4:11, as well as Revelation 11:4, where it talks about the 2 candlesticks, 2 olive trees. But first, John in Revelation 11 is told to measure the temple, and then in Zechariah 4, Zerubbabel has the plummet in his hand, so he's measuring the temple. And so it represents the measuring of the temple. And then we recently had the other Google Doodle that had the scales, and inside, on one side of the scales, it had the number 144, and then the other side had the sun, which Jesus is represented by the sun in the Bible. And so you had this measuring taking place. But I wanted to try to understand why God was saying to serve the king of Babylon. So I put in here in Google, I put, why did God say to serve the king of Babylon? And so I pulled up this link over here that has some commentaries about Jeremiah 27:17. So again, it's interesting that's coming up in verse 17, saying over here, do not listen to them, serve the king of Babylon, and you will live. Why should this city become a ruin? And incidentally, it's in Revelation 17 that talks about the fall of Babylon and Mystery Babylon. But there's some commentaries over here, and in this one it's saying the prophecy of the restoration of the vessels of the temple was clearly not a mere prediction. It had been used as an incentive to rebellion. Make one last effort, the prophets virtually said, and the spoiler shall be compelled to disgorge his booty. The prophets saw that such an effort would but hasten the utter destruction of the temple and the city. And then I'll just read this one over here, Matthew Henry commentary. It says, Jeremiah persuades the king of Judah to surrender to the king of Babylon. It is their wisdom to submit to the heavy iron yoke of the cruel tyrant, that they may secure their lives. And it is not much more, and is it not much more to our wisdom to submit to the pleasant and easy yoke of our Lord and Master Jesus Christ, that we may secure our souls? It were well if sinners would be afraid of the destruction threatened against all who will not have Christ to reign over them. Why should they die the second death, infinitely worse than that by sword and famine, when they may submit and live? And those who encourage sinners to go on in sinful ways will perish with them. So over here it's contrasting the fact that basically it's better to die with sword or with famine and to save your soul, which is what Jesus said, than to submit to the king of Babylon. So even though God is telling them to serve the king of Babylon and to go under his yoke, or else they'll die from sword or from death, this is basically a foreshadow of the tribulation, when that's what it'll take to be delivered from the king of Babylon. And so, and that's what it will take to have life. And it's interesting that right in the middle of that you have the word Yeshua. This is a form of the word Yeshua right here. Okay, and I did this other table. It says Jerusalem compassed Noel Yuletide, and it comes up in Luke 21, which is interesting because that's already 3 times 7, so that's 777, and then you also have 20 over there. But I just realized this is actually the second match. If you go back to the first match, it comes up in Luke 21 verse 16 through 24. So you have Luke 21, and then you have verse 17 right here where it says, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. And again you have Yeshua right here, Yeshua, which is the name that's talking about here. And this is talking about when Israel is surrounded by all of her enemies, and it comes up in verse 17 where it says, "And you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake." Okay, and this is a table that, I'm not sure if this is the one that I did last year. I know I did one on New York Nuke and some other tables last year that had to do with Christmas, and I don't remember what all the terms were that I put in that table, but I just put in the words New York Nuke, Christmas, Noel, and Yuletide, and all of those came up, and they came up in the book of Acts 2016 through 2028. And like I said, I had done some tables last year. If you want to look at some of those videos that I did a year ago, there was more tables and more terms that I had put in. But it's interesting that this comes up, and it's coming up with what looks like 2016 and 2017. This is technically the year 2016, because if they had put in the year 0 into the timeline, because a number timeline would have the year 0, so you would have BC, the BC years, and then you would have year 0, and then the AD years, but they didn't put in a year 0. So technically, this would be the year 2016. But over here it says, "For Paul had determined to sail past Ephesus, that he might not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hastening, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. And from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called to him the elders of the church." So this is when the elders of the church are called in verse 17. Okay, so I'm going to skip over to this table over here, because I originally did these tables because of the United Nations ruling recently on December 21st, where I believe it was 128 nations, and I'm just getting this from other YouTube videos that I've seen. I haven't really seen the news on this, but supposedly they voted against Israel, and so that's the reason I had done this table. And so it's interesting, this comes up in Samuel 7:21. So again, you have the 7 and then 21, which is 3 times 7, so that would be 777. But it's interesting how these terms come up, and so I just wanted to show you that, because I put in United Nation, and I had tried nations first, but when I put in some of these other terms and it didn't work, so I just did United Nation, and then I realized it was talking about Israel, so I put United Nation, Israel, and then I put holy, because the Bible talks about the holy nation, and then I put in the word Jew. I was going to put in Jew and Gentile, but Gentile didn't come up, but you see that Jew comes up right here, right above the word Israel. And then I put fig tree, and then Yesh, which is short for Yeshua, and lion. And it's really interesting how Yesh comes up, because it's coming up right here in the green, and it's where it says, "Thou hast spoken, and let thy name be magnified forever, saying, Jehovah of hosts is God over Israel, and the house of thy servant David shall be established before thee, for thou, Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, has revealed to thy servant, saying, I will build thee a house. Therefore hath thy servant found in his heart to pray this prayer unto thee." And so, as you can see, it has the name Yeshua right in there. And so once again, God is confirming the name Yesh as being a valid term for Yeshua. Right here it says, "Let thy name be magnified." And it's interesting that you have the word united over here, and it's talking about Israel. And over here it says, "And what one nation in the earth is like thy people, even like Israel, whom God went to redeem unto himself for a people, and to make him a name, and to do great things for you, and terrible things for thy land, before thy people, whom thou redeemest to thee out of Egypt." And so that's all I have time for. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.